Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is, I guess, the final step in some ways of us starting to put in place our new regional pest management plan, which was adopted in October last year. So the operational plan, because of the timing, we normally give these to you in September, but because of the timing of adoption of our regional pest management plan, it's coming to you now. So what we've put together is a kind of 15-month operational plan covering the rest of this financial year and the new financial year. And also be complemented by your regular annual report in September for our implementation of the regional pest management plan. So the operational plan, it tries to give a complete picture of all of the biosecurity activity that we're doing as a council. This is a new thing. Previous operational plans haven't really talked about what Tairāwhiti Roads or our parks people have been doing. And we've also, because MOUs with DOC was a key part of the implementation of our regional pest management plan, we've included information on DOC work programs in relation to weeds and animal pests. So we're hoping that this document, maybe more than others in the past, is able to be a one-stop shop for people interested in what is going on in the area of pest management in our district. So in terms of the new things, I guess building on what was adopted in the final plan, site-led programs, these are a completely new thing that have come into our pest management plan. And so what's included in the operational plan is identifying sites where our biosecurity staff will be undertaking service delivery of some weeds and pests to support a site-led program. And this complements very much the work that's being done in the parks and roading area as well. So the idea is that we're much more synchronised and actually getting really good bang for buck, I guess, value for money on implementation of pest control. So I should stress that the site-led program and the operational plan is what we've identified so far. So it also outlines the assistance that is available for site-led programs on private land. And we're quite hopeful, possibly optimistic is a better word, that there will be a number of private landowners who come forward over the period of the life of this operational plan that will actually be wanting to embark on a site-led pest management plan on their property. One of the things that we'd like to stress to people, though, is that actually the first step in doing site-led weed management is to develop a weed management plan or pest management plan. And so that's really where the first part of assistance that will be provided by the council. In relation to our possum control, this is an area where there's a big change in our regional pest management plan around our service delivery. So that's now focused on the buffer zone with Hawke's Bay Regional Council, our soil conservation plantings, particularly in the 1 to 5 year old age group, our important biodiversity areas, the protection management areas, and also provision for a new landowner directed possum control program. I think this is something that we would have liked to offer a lot more support than we're able to in this operational plan to landowners. So at the moment, what's proposed is that landowners who want to undertake intensive possum management on their property enter into a joint agreement with council. The council biosecurity staff will do the initial knockdown, and then the landowners are involved in maintaining the possum numbers at a low levels. This is an opt-in program. So essentially this is providing for something in our productive areas where we're no longer doing possum control service delivery as a way of them actually continuing to build on the work that's been done in the past. We've proposed some criteria in the pest management operational plan that this be 2 or more adjacent landowners, and also that there be a minimum threshold of about a 10 hectare size of land. I guess that we know there is some interest in our rural community in this kind of program, but they probably need a level of support that unfortunately we haven't provided for in this operational plan, so they'd get some support, but not as much as would be ideal to really make this program a big success. Tairāwhiti Roads and parks, I guess these are the really visible things that we've had a lot of feedback over the years. You'll recall that prior to our new regional pest management plan, Tairāwhiti Roads weren't required to do any weed or pest management in the road corridor, and so it's become quite weedy. And so we've been working with them about how do we get that down to a managed level, because obviously going from no weed control to fully implementation of the plan is going to take a few years. So in the appendices, we've identified the priority areas for this period. And we've put a lot of focus on some of our really problematic species that we call a progressive containment. So the ones we still try and fight quite hard to reduce the area that they're spread on. And areas also weeds where neighbours are undertaking control. And that's something that's been a long-standing concern from our community, that a private landowner can be doing weed control and then it's just re-invaded from the road corridor. In terms of parks, they are very focused on those key reserves of Titirangi, WD Leisner Reserve, Makarori Headland and the Gisborne Beachfront, Waikanaita Midway, but also doing a small amount of weed control in the Riri reserves. They've done quite a comprehensive look at their reserve network in terms of weeds, and we've worked with them to develop priorities around what are the weeds that they should be targeting in the first instance. I think it's fair to say again, this is quite a new program for them. They've not done a lot of weed control in their reserves in the past, and so I'd expect that over time we will start to see some significant gains in our parks, as I expect we will in our road corridor as well. In terms of roads, we've had many discussions at this committee about Holyleaf Senecio, and so we've given clear direction to the Tairāwhiti roads that the road corridor is a major source of spread of that and also of pampas, and so those are big areas of emphasis for them. But also we have got an ongoing problem with blackberry across the network, really invading neighbouring properties. So that's where a lot of the emphasis of the roading program is, but also recognising that for the road network, agapanthus is a very serious problem because it blocks the drainage network, and that was actually a weed that was added into the Pest Management Plan as a result of Tairāwhiti Road's submission. So they're focusing a site-led program on protecting the drainage values of Wainui Road around agapanthus. In terms of other pest management activities, there's a lot of other things that I guess are not part of our regional pest management plan, but which are nevertheless activities which council's involved in. We're signatories to the National Pest Plant Accord and the National Pest Pet Accord. And so these are both accords around what plants and animals can be sold in nurseries, garden centres and pet shops. So we do annual inspections there. We've got our MPI-funded Dirimo and National Freshwater Pest Program, which has been running for a number of years really successfully. Very importantly, of course, advocacy and education. We've included a program for the release of biocontrols, and just perhaps for the committee may not be that familiar with biocontrols, but they are things like some of the cinnabar moth for ragwort. There's an aphid for woolly nightshade. These are actually insects which are really good managers of particularly some of these very widespread weeds that we have, where our chemical control methods are prohibitive. We're just not going to be able to manage them using traditional methods, but actually biocontrols are a really effective way. And we've certainly seen that with ragwort. It's a very intensive effort of releasing the cinnabar moth in the East Coast in the 90s and early 2000s has resulted in ragwort moving from being a really widespread and problematic weed to being quite isolated and manageable. So we see that more use of biocontrols is a really good way for us to try and get on top of some of these really entrenched weeds that we have in the district. The operational plan also includes a monitoring plan, which is about monitoring against the KPIs, and also outlines our approach for compliance and enforcement. And these were all things that were more strongly emphasised as being areas we need to focus on in the Regional Pest Management Plan. So that's just a brief summary of what's in the operational plan, and Mr. Karotiana and I are both very happy to answer questions on that. Yes, sorry, Madam Chair. Yes, I think that this is still a work in progress with DOC. So we've included where we've got to in the operational plan, but I've just, in a discussion with them this morning, identified that there's a couple of areas that they have plans for weed control that we haven't identified. I'm pleased to say that Riverside Road Micro Reserve is one of them, where they've now developed a site-led program and looking at a whole range of weeds, including Old Man's Beard. And there's also another site that, I'm sorry, escapes my mind, where it is that they're doing old man's beard control. But we'll keep working with DOC. I think this is for them, it's quite new. Like the roading guys, they were never required to meet our pest management plan before, and they've expressed a strong willingness to come to the party on this, but they're still working through the implications for their budgets, because obviously they've prioritised at a national level, and where their national priorities lie and our regional or district priorities lie are not necessarily aligning completely.
Thank you very much. Councillor Stokes.
Thank you. Thank you for your report, Lois. Every year since I've been on council at annual plan time or 10-year plan time, constituents come in and complain about privet. So I'm asking this question on behalf of a constituent who's very passionate about privet. And I see on page 41 that privet, the Chinese and the tree, are part of our site-led program. And you touched on earlier on some of our site-led programs. So can I assure that constituent that now that privet is on here as well, that it will be removed from all council reserves?
So through you, Madam Chair, unfortunately, no. I guess that when we've done the prioritisation about weed control on council reserves, privet is identified on a few reserves. I think Titirangi as being one where really there's a good chance of making a big impact there, but not on every council reserve. The work program and the operational plan identifies what the parks team have budgeted to do, and so most of the reserves that we have that have got privet on, there will be no privet control. I think privet is one weed where there is really good potential for biocontrol, and I think that's one of the ones that we're looking at quite carefully. With biocontrols, we have to purchase the agents, and then we have a plan of how we spread them around the district. But privet's a widespread problem in New Zealand, and so other councils are also very interested in how we can better manage privet. But one of the problems with it is it's such a prolific seeder that unfortunately it's quite a hard one to manage.
Councillor Stokes, you could assure her that we are starting on Titirangi, but on page 60, it is on the spreadsheet.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. With all my activities in the national parks and on the Great Walks and that, I've learnt to hate with a passion stoats. And the reason for that is because they kill just for fun rather than when they're hungry. They'll just go out and kill. So I was a bit concerned. My training ground is Makariri Headland and the Okatu Reserve there. And the Okatu Reserve is quite spectacular at the moment with the growth in bird life and that. And just yesterday, I noticed the stoat running from the Okatu Reserve onto the Makariri Headland, and I'd never seen that before. So I just wondered if there's a possibility for a stitch in time, or whether they are established there, or whether it was just one little beast that was out there with the potential to be quite devastating. So I just wanted to advise that there was a stoat in that area.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think if you're seeing stoats, they're quite widespread. Unfortunately, and they've got a really large range. I know that there are some community predator-free initiatives that are starting up in that area, and certainly supporting that kind of action is something that we'd really like to do. I'm meeting with the chair of Wainui Predator-Free this afternoon, actually. And stoats and all of the mustelids are actually something where there's a really good ability for communities to get involved in effective control. So they're not like possums where they will just, there's so many of them that actually there needs to be quite a lot of effort put in to get their numbers down. Stoats, ferrets, weasels, they've got a range, quite a large range, and a bit of work is needed to identify where you optimally place your traps. But once you've done that, actually clearing of traps is something that is quite successfully managed by communities. So there's definitely potential there, I think, for looking at predators particularly, and trying to link into the predator-free program. Is there a comment you wanted to make on that?
No, that's really true. Just reinforce they are widespread, and they certainly are a pest species we haven't done a lot of been actively controlling. They're just a bykill of some of our other possum work, but certainly recognise that, particularly with increased interest in protecting biodiversity, there's certainly a pest animal that we need to support the community with the tools to help them actually support any management programs. So it's an area that we'd certainly like to, our group would like to work in going forward. So,
I was just going to say, thank you, Mr. Cronian. Is it possible that, like, that Gisborne District Council will have some tracks that can be used from time to time to use? Because we do make cat tracks available, and I think we make possum tracks available. So it would be really great if we made Stoke tracks. And sometimes groups might make those Stoke tracks, but I've seen in my farm forestry group in different regions where a group of men will actually make up the Stoke track. It's not likely that difficult. And then they're available where there are people prepared to set them and clear them for the need. You think you might do so?
Well, through Madam Chair, it's certainly we've have got a plan, a design to actually, we have made these cricket traps in our own time and provided those to the community. But certainly they're quite easily built. But the problem I have with those cricket traps that you get your fingers caught in them, you've got no fingers left. They're very quite dangerous. But there may be other safe catch traps that may be more suitable, particularly where you're using around where public have got, and so we just need to be careful about the tools we give to the public. Last thing we want is something coming back on council, and I'm just mindful of that fact.
Thank you. Councillor McLean.
Thanks, Madam Chair. On page 51 under 7.1, new monitoring tools, I see you're talking about camera monitoring. Have you got any plans as to where these cameras are going to go?
So through you, Madam Chair, this has been quite a new initiative, and it is really focused at the predator side of things. So we've done an initial trial of camera monitoring in Wainaki Waterworks Bush, and that's been a really useful tool, which I hope to present to you next committee meeting, just the findings of that monitoring. But we envisaged that we could, anywhere where we're doing biodiversity related pest control, that we'd be using the cameras as a first sort of step in terms of establishing what's there as part of our monitoring program. So whenever we do any pest control operations, we always do a pre-monitor to understand what's there. And so cameras are now a new part of our sort of suite of tools for monitoring.
Supplementary, Madam Chair, is there a cost into that?
So through you, Madam Chair, we've purchased the cameras. They're purchased out of the Wainaki budget. So the cost is staff time to deploy them, as it is for any other monitoring.
Can I just ask a couple of questions, please? What was the determination for the 3 lakes that we're having close monitoring?
So that's really, through you, Madam Chair, that's a risk-based assessment. So one of the things that we have, so the risk is accidental or deliberate introduction of aquatic weeds or pest fish. And so where lakes or water bodies are regularly used by the public or easily accessible to the public, unfortunately, those are higher risk areas. Eel fishermen are another way in which some of those aquatic pests are moved around. And actually bird life, unfortunately. So things like lagrosiphon often gets moved by ducks.
With respect, I think you might cover my query on the dog program and all things there, and I'm really pleased to hear that maybe we have to do something about that in the road. That's excellent. And likewise, moth plant. I'm on a tourist stream. It's quite a moth plant up there. It seems to me a little bit where you can one or two other areas closer into the city of like dots that are spreading into private gardens.
So through you, Madam Chair, that's a progressive containment pest. So we would be, like all of the progressive containment pests, have our staff, weed staff will be working closely with landowners to ensure they're not spreading further. You'll recall our approach with progressive containment pests is exactly that: keep them where they are, don't let them spread, but also we want to be trying to move them back. So for infestations on the periphery of the urban area, like at the Hanamatua stream, those are quite a high priority because we don't want it to spread further out into the rural area or into bush areas.
Are there any further questions with respect to the plan? Do I have someone prepared to do the recommendations which are on page 22?
No problem. Thanks, Heather. Firstly, Trevor Freeman, former staff member, and then myself the last couple of years. So yes, it started about 2009 and has been ongoing since then and comes into force on the 1st of May. So I just have a short PowerPoint. We'll just go through that and more than happy to cover any questions after that. Yes, notice here gazetted August last year and into force 1st of May. That's a very tight time frame to get the NES moving. So all plantation forests over 1 hectare in size must provide council with a harvest plan. We'll certainly look at whether we're going to require all of those to come in the future. There may be smaller areas or areas on specific land that we don't, but at the moment we will look at all of those. There are certain planning provisions in particularly our Tairāwhiti plan, which incorporates the old regional land and water plan, land and district plan, that some provisions remain. We'll go into them, but they must be specified within this new document. The activities that are covered in the NES are several there. The important ones for Gisborne District, forestation comes into this process. It hasn't been in our planning before. We'll get into that a little bit further down. Pruning, thinning to waste will not be a big issue here. Earthworks, river crossings will be covered by our freshwater plan. Quarrying's unlikely to be a big issue. Harvesting will be. Mechanical land preparation, there's very little of in our district, and I'd be surprised to see that change. Replanting is already very much part of any harvest consent and will continue to be so. The ancillary activities are the introduction of slash traps. We're actually very keen on them being introduced to hold slash in watercourses if we get any there. So we're quite happy with that being in place. And there are some provisions for clearance of indigenous vegetation, but it's mainly fairly minor and on existing infrastructure within areas of forest. The general provisions cover a number of issues and very much similar to what we have in place now. And some of them are the likes of fuel storage and refuelling are very much covered by other legislation as well, but they are included in those general provisions. Where we get more stringency, and these are the things that are of real concern to us. So there is provision where we have areas mapped within the Tairāwhiti regional resource management plan, protection management areas, outstanding landscapes. Coastal environment, as they are mapped into the plan, are still valid, and those rules trump the NES. Elsewhere where they're not mentioned, the NES takes precedent. Our freshwater plan very much takes precedent over the NES at the moment. That's something we fought very, very carefully for in the submission process, was to have that included, and that has changed in the last year. With the introduction of the NES, initially it was going to be very permissive, and our council in particular pushed very hard that where permitted activities applied, that there would be an opportunity to charge for those activities. There are a limited number of them but they are most of the ones we would be dealing with. The one that we do miss out on, and we believe could be quite a cost to the council, is for afforestation. So that wasn't included. The other ones are, and certainly the harvesting and earthworks ones are the ones there that are really critical to us that we can recover costs. I'll get onto a little bit that further down the track, because so Heather, can I just get that so that's just the full page again, please? And it's about the fifth one thing. Oh, I can go through from there anyway. So New Zealand's been divided up into these ESC areas, and you'll notice only now the pink on there is our red. So compared to most New Zealand, we have a lot of red. So 56% of our forest area is red, and that's where the consent requirements will be. Orange was quite a concern to us, and we had a lot of orange move through to red. Green and yellow are quite permissive in where the consents are required, but it is on less sensitive land. So when you look at the map of New Zealand, you'll find there is a lot of red here, which just reflects the erosion issues we have. So there's consents required for those activities. So all our red zones, basically once you get over 2 hectares, there's a requirement for a consent. And where we have orange zone, which has a higher risk, any land over 25 degrees and all a red zone. That's not too different to what we have covered by the existing plan, so there's not a great deal of change there. What we do have some concerns with is in the replanting requirement there is no allowance for soil erosion in the measures over which we have control, but there is in the harvesting one, and we believe that that will apply throughout the whole process. Some of the things we really need to consider, we can charge for consents just as we did in the past through Section 36, so that doesn't change. Our plan was full of non-notification clauses. The NES isn't, so there's a requirement to notify consents that is quite different to what it was under the existing plan. There is reviews of the NES at 1, 3 and 5 years, and we need to be very careful that the erosion susceptibility classification doesn't change too much in there. We need to be quite careful that there's not too much in the way of red going back to orange. We are locked into the standard, so the usual regional planning process has a 10-year life and plans are reviewed. This one here, we're locked into the NES, so changes in technology cannot be taken into account unless a minister wishes to change it. We do have some uncertainty over Land Overlay 3.0 and the replant, but we believe we can control it through the harvesting. In our next steps, we have some meetings coming up later this month with the council, MPI and forest industry. Just trying to organise that at the moment. We have another follow-up with council and MPI in April. We are looking at an update of that erosion susceptibility classification maps next month. And there is a meeting next week in Wellington on how we're going to monitor and evaluate this. And the point Gisborne District Council needs to make at that meeting is that we stretch to monitor our consents at the moment, let alone the permitted activities. So that's the message that we'll provide to that. And that's very much the flavour of where Hawke's Bay and other parts of New Zealand are heading. The National Working Group meets again on the 5th of April in Wellington, and the NES comes into being on the 1st of May. So there's going to be quite a change, not so much the Gisborne District, lots of parts of New Zealand, there'll be some dramatic changes coming up with that. Okay. Yep.
Thank you very much. You've had a long period and we appreciate that. The Gisborne District Council did make a big effort to make sure the standards in it suited our highly eroded country. But I wanted to ask Mr. Zannon, what is the staffing resource implication if every planting requires a notified resource consent?
I don't think we'd get into notifieds as such. It's just that that provision is gone. It's in our existing plan. I don't think that's. Don't know that that would be the case, but it would certainly stretch things.
Even the actual resource consent plan, that will take some resource that we haven't needed, and that will require a resource that we haven't had today.
Yes, yes, Madam Chairman. I've been involved in a proactive company has looked at exactly that after the 1st of May. And it is quite an exercise, but the thing we need to take into account there is it is a very, very positive approach, because you look at those areas that perhaps shouldn't be logged in 25 years' time, and they get taken out now. The big advantage we have here in the Gisborne District is people can obtain a reversion grant through the ECFP to let that area revert, so they compensated for that at the time. So that first approach on that, while it's time consuming, we can charge for it where there's a consent required, and we can make a whole lot of provisions now as to how we're going to deal with harvesting down the track. So it's quite positive.
And just can you expand on the issues around replanting of overlay 3A that you mentioned at the last bullet point, maybe some issues around that?
Yes, Madam Chair, we are a little unsure where that will go, but we do have works plan requirements with agreement with most landowners. Most of them will be commercial activities who are in the game of replanting areas of forest anyway. And the harvesting consent actually allows us to control soil erosion at the time of harvesting and post-harvesting. So we're reasonably confident that we can deal with it at that time.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Dunn?
Yes, could you just expand on that locking in today's standards component? Because I don't quite understand it. And
Yep.
Is that any different to any other NES or any other NPS?
Yes, through you, Madam Chairperson. That's what happens here is an NES gets made and there is no time when it gets reviewed unless a minister decides to do so. Where a regional plan, there's an expectancy that it will get reviewed once every 10 years or within a certain time frame. Or a council can go through a private plan change to make provisions for technology. So that's actually excluded from it. And as a region and a district, we are confined to the content of what comes out in NES. Other NESs are much the same. The difference is really with this one is this is such a wide embracing set of criteria involved here, where the ones I've been involved in previously are things like water meters, which are water meter here is very similar to what it will be anywhere else in New Zealand, whereas the provisions we have here are quite different throughout the country. So this is a little different, but that locking in provision is still there for all. Well,
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
I'm just wondering whether the same lock-in mechanism applies to national policy statements as well, or is this really different?
well, they highlight policy as opposed to a set of standards. So I don't know the implications of that. This is more getting into the operational side of it.
Are there any further questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kerry, I wonder if you could give a quick indication to councillors about the number of resource consents we currently process each year and how those figures might change under the NES. Sorry to put you on the spot, but
no, not a
be
problem.
quite helpful.
Well, I think I haven't got numbers that accurately, but we process in excess of 100 most years now, and a range of variations that go with it. I'd anticipate that's not going to change too much. What will change is we may have a certain number of permitted activity applications come in that have to be processed in addition to what resource consents we have. And the other thing we need to take into account that's separate from the NES is the Waterwood's here with us. And so the number of consents was going to increase as a result of that. So we're now, well, we're nearly 30 years from Cyclone Bowler next month, and all that planting that went in immediately post Cyclone Bowler is now about to be harvested. So that gets captured by this. So we'll need to record what effects the NES has, as well as that upsurge in forested area within the district.
Most of those are so we'll be up to around 200 forestry consents now a year over the last 12 months. Mr. Hudson says we expect permitted activities to be able to that, and so certainly it's a very substantial workload increase.
Thank you, Ms. Easton. Sorry, and not to put you on the spot, but I'm sure you know it. Because permitted activities haven't had a charge before, are you able to just give a quick overview on how the charging regime would work and for the benefit of our committee and public?
Through you, Madam Chair, we've been developing our fees and charges on this, and it'll come to council meeting. But what essentially we have set is a permitted activity monitoring fee. So when a harvest plan is lodged with the council, we will be able to identify that forest is required to be monitored.
Just in addition to that, Madam Chairman, I noted in there that we've got 56% of our region is red zone, so we can anticipate red zone with over 2 hectares requires a consent. But when an area of forest is planted, there is often the red zone and then a peripheral area of other zones to get to a stable fence line. So I think we'll have considerably more than 56% of our forested area will need a consent to accommodate for all that. And I think it's going to be more like 80%. And there are also within this, and I haven't gone into any detail, there's a lot of smaller criteria that may trigger a consent outside the red zone. For instance, distances from water courses and a range of issues like that. So I think it'll be 85% of sites will probably still require a resource consent.
Thank you very much. Is there any other question around the table? If not, is there someone who's to move? It's a noting report. Thanks to Councillor Bunn, Councillor Stokes. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. Thank you very much.
Through you, Madam Chair, I just haven't got anything in particular I wanted to highlight in this report, except, I guess, to say that much as over the last 3 to 5 years, the government has been focusing on water reform, and we've seen a lot of changes to the national policy framework around water. They are now turning their minds to biodiversity, and so I guess this is, partly a signal to you that we can expect that there will be direction coming down from government, probably in the form of a national policy statement around biodiversity, and that therefore is likely to impact on our future work programme. I guess also, as I say in the report, we've done a lot of work in the biodiversity space over the last 3 years, and that's something that going forward, Council's priorities have changed, and so we won't be progressing as much of that work in the future.
Lois, thanks a lot for this report. When I read it, Thank you, Lois, for this report. When I read this, I was not happy because it felt to me this goes against what this committee decided to support 2 meetings ago when we had the paper on biodiversity, and one of the recommendations was, I don't have it word for word, but that staff would go and look for more money to support biodiversity work in our region. So when I read this, I was quite surprised because to me it felt there was a different direction given than what I read in this report. And when I read this report, it felt to me we are dropping the ball on this very important issue for a relatively small amount of money. So that was my first thought. My second thought, I want to take you to page where we talk about, let me just get the page, where we talk about finances. And it says in the last, any additional work to support biodiversity, including the implementation of further incentives or data collection, will require the reprioritization. But what I remember from our paper 2 times ago is that we said that we would go out and see if we can get some external input, especially for our small $30,000 QE2 grant to help private landowners. So I was just wondering, in all of this, even though we are spending all our money on biosecurity, and I am very happy about that, if we can include in this that we will still try and source some external funding, or at least reach out and see if there might be money available that we can support that small pot of QE2 money to help private landowners. And then my last comment is about, I'm concerned that you just signaled that the government is saying this is going to be a priority for us, But we are saying we are planning no money in the next 10-year budget for this. So to me, that is, we need to be proactive and make sure that when the NAS comes in, we would have the budget and the workforce ready to take up this work. I will stop now.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of things just to respond to in a number of points raised there. Just firstly, yes, biodiversity work program has suffered under the draft LTP in terms of those provisions. So we do have to reprioritize work areas in terms of what we can afford at the moment as proposed. Earlier, I think, and Councillor Dunn might have raised this earlier with me as well, in terms of funding the program. There is quite a clear link in terms of water quality and some of the biodiversity work that we have to do. So we do plan to come back to Council for a workshop next EPNR meeting, and we will also be exploring in terms of additional funding through water quality mechanisms that we might be able to access. And so staff will be doing some work around those opportunities, because it has suffered under this draft LTP, but it's an area, and we plan to have a staff workshop. I think that was actually in one of the actions down for Council to do, and it's in consultation with the Chair. We plan to bring back that workshop next meeting and report back.
Councillor Dunn.
Following on from that, may it be best that we leave this to lie on the table? Because when I read the recommendation and it says there is currently no provision to substantially progress the biodiversity work program, is that not what the workshop may be aiming to do, where we will have provisions to expand it? So I just wondering, it might be best to leave this to lie on the table.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. This is mainly a noting paper. That's up to councillors whether they wish to let it lie. There is a biodiversity work program. So what is the signal? There is no additional work that we can do over what we've accounted for in this year's work program and through for the LTP. But as part of that workshop, we could bring a paper back. So.
Can I just suggest it's actually the wording, because I hear what Councillor Dunn's saying. This actually says there is no provision to substantially progress the work program. So what we are really telling us to grow the work, there's no potential to grow the work program in the current year, but you will be doing some work.
Yeah.
So we just need to maybe change the wording. We're noting the content of the report, in particular note the program will be downscaled to 18.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I suppose what we're saying is we've got a pot of money. We're not growing the program, as you clearly point out. So what we are presently doing is risk prioritising the workshop, and looking at exploring other funding mechanisms might mean we are possible to grow it outside of what's been set aside in the LTP. But this is, you're correct, Madam Chair, this is to grow the program outside of what we have, where staff are also noting that the program isn't as extensive as councillors would have hoped for.
And the wording.
I just want to signal that I think that it's a bad message to put out to the public that we're downscaling biodiversity work. And so by not taking that recommendation is actually signalling that we do take biodiversity really seriously in the district. And just to reiterate that we have a strategic direction in this that we've set based around why Tairāwhiti, and that water is a significant asset that we want to protect going into the future. And I think that biodiversity goes hand in hand with water security or water quality, and so that a workshop does make a lot of sense. And I thank the staff that we're taking that step, because the water cycle tells us that water and land go together, and if we're going to take water seriously, we need to take biodiversity seriously too.
Thank you. Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Just to signal that the biodiversity, the other route is also through our policy and planning route as well. And so policy and planning will be very much part of that workshop in terms of those mechanisms that we might use.
Yeah, thank you for this report. Just as we go through all these recommendations, I noticed that there may be some decommissioning of bores. As we go through this process, I'm sure we'll ensure that the whole integrity of the network will still be maintained, because I see it's for measuring water levels and aquifers and stuff.
Yes, that, excuse me, that is correct, Madam Chair. Sorry, I'll start again. Through Madam Chair. There is a standard that has to be followed in the decommissioning of bores, and that requires that any associated aquifers above and below any damaged zone are protected, and typically that means that those zones have to be cemented off. And we then have the situation at the surface where we do not want to have old bores just lying around. So typically you dig down 1 metre, then cut it off, and then rehabilitate the land on top. So that, in a very, very broad sense, is how you'd actually do the decommissioning. There are other technical aspects which I won't bore you with. Yes, that is correct. We're anticipating that we've already had the expressions of interest to go out for the contractors for stage 1. And from that, we'll be shortlisting people with the suitable qualifications to do the first stage of that work, and an RFP, request for proposal, will go out at the end of next week. Then we'll consider those at the beginning of March and grant the contract within March for works happening for that first stage in April. And then obviously any really high risk wells will be we'll start decommissioning work next financial year.
That's better. Yeah, I can give you a brief overview. So gravel extraction is managed through the Gisborne Regional Freshwater Plan. We encourage gravel extraction where it provides the most benefit for river management purposes, such as flood risk and protecting existing structures. Gravel management is required to minimise potential effects on significant habitats and native species. Gravel extraction may only be undertaken in outstanding water bodies if it's provided for in a gravel extraction management plan, for which we don't have any at this stage. Gravel extraction demand is proposed to be increasing due to the increased forestry harvest to construct forestry roads, and concerns have been raised by the community as to how gravel extraction is affecting the river environment. So the forestry industry indicates that the peak harvest is not for several more years, so demand is likely to continue to increase. The survey cross-sections were originally developed by the East Cape Catchment Board in the 1950s and 60s to primarily monitor the rapidly grading rivers in the region. And this data allows the calculation of average riverbed levels to be calculated. And the active riverbed is the part of the river which is, I guess, affected during flood flows. Yeah. So average bed levels are useful to assess the impact of gravel extraction when they're positioned upstream and downstream of gravel extraction sites. Currently, this is not the case, but the current survey methods and sites do give a good indication of whether riverbed levels are increasing or decreasing over time. So the key rivers from our recent assessment are the Waipu River, which doesn't have any significant trends in terms of increasing or decreasing. So what we're proposing is that gravel extraction can continue in the Waipu River. The Mata River, where a lot of gravel extraction is currently and has happened in the past, is actually decreasing in the upper catchment. However, the lower catchment is still increasing, but yeah, we've just got concerns around just the volume that's extracted over a short duration. So we just want to be careful around gravel extraction in the Mata River. The Karaka Tuwhero River, there's no significant trend. However, there's a limited budget of material for that river, and it's a different geology. So we just want to be careful around gravel extraction in that river, and we recommend a gravel management plan is developed on that river. And also the Mata River. And the Mangatu River is gradually increasing in the Waipoa River headwaters. And we propose that its gravel extraction can continue in that area. So what we're proposing is those gravel management plans are developed in collaboration with local hapu and identifying values within the area and making sure that they're accounted for in the gravel management plan. And we propose that the Mata and the Karaka Tuwhero rivers are the first management plan areas that we want to progress. So that just gives you an overview, I guess, if you've got any questions.
Thank you. Other questions to the report?
Thank you.
It just seemed to me that I know you saying towards the end that you will negotiate plans with partners, but it would be this kind of material would be really good for the townships and planning communities just as an information tool,
okay,
as well as doing what you need to do where you are developing up the gravel extraction activities. But when our townships and our communities have our meetings running at the consultation meetings, they really enjoy getting valuable information about the rivers and their catch. And so the level of information that you've got, and obviously only address the rivers that are relevant in each particular township, I'm sure capital of their debt would stay the same. So if we could make a note, because sometimes it's not just the 10-year LGP matters that we need to take to our communities, and that's really useful local information that the people would value. So could we make sure we plan to do that? And only needs to be 10 or 15 minutes around the rivers.
Yep.
So that gravel extraction, because it is very topical. That'd be great.
No problem.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we have, are there any further questions? No, thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This represents a report till the actual quarter report is to the end of December 2017, but the financials are as of November. just a few highlights in terms of the actual report, that overall we're favourably on budget, both in terms of our activities and our capital expenditure. There's an update there on the managed aquifer recharge that we're on the way in terms of our stage 2, and hope Miss Easton can hopefully give us a quick update on where we're actually at with that, because this report is generated, as you know, as of year end. There was a lot of work undertaken by staff in terms of the Masonic Hotel, which was deemed a dangerous building. I'm happy to say that all those people who were affected have been relocated or found suitable accommodation. We were on target in terms of 80% of our performance measures for the quarter, and 80% of actions are on track and have had their targets met. I'll take the rest of the paper as read if there are any questions of myself or staff.
Thank you. Councillor.
Yeah, with the Masonic, I mean, obviously the most critical risk was the residents and people in there. But is it still a fire risk? I mean, is there still an element of risk you've got to do something about, because it can take other buildings with it and all that sort of thing. So removing the residents is fine, but that hasn't actually removed the totality of the risk.
Yeah. Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, it still represents a fire risk. There's a dangerous buildings notice on the building. Staff have evacuated. The main issue, I suppose, in terms of fire would be anyone, you know, in terms of breaking in or going onto the property that might start a fire. But that's really the potential. The major source has been eliminated. And it's now for the owner to progress if they want to actually use that building again. The risk is...
yeah, sure. Will there be timeframes on what the owner will have to do going forward?
Well, it's currently an unoccupied building. The requirements are on there through the fire service itself. Mm-hmm. There are upgrades that need to be carried out if the building needs to be done under the Building Act, and that's what we're addressing with our dangerous notices, now that all residents have been removed.
Can I just come in there quickly while we're on that topic? Yesterday I parked outside that building, and there's quite a bit of debris, as in carton, pillow, and a bit of other fabric that would start a fire very easily in the open foyer. So I wonder what the process is for keeping an eye on the fact that a repository of rubbish is tempting for people who die. So could we give our people who walk the streets maybe keep an eye on what is left lying around in the foyer? And it's that open foyer onto Low Street.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is a known issue, and we have been raising that with a building owner's representative. It is for the building owner to keep tidy, not council, and it is an ongoing issue which we have raised and are monitoring.
I also spotted on Facebook that there's a petition currently going, and when I checked earlier today, there were nearly 700 people that signed the petition to stop freedom camping at the Makarori car park. So when I read through this petition that was lodged, it is a safety concern of locals that feel during that peak period where locals use that spot in summer, it is packed with camper vans and it creates a big hazard. So they are having this petition and they will bring it to council. So I just wanted to raise, I went to Makarori yesterday to take my boys for a surf so I could observe that what was going on there. And it was quite busy. So I'm just signalling that there's some local Makarori residents or local surfers that feel that that area should be kept for surfing only. and that it should not be filled up with camper vans.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I saw the start of that petition, so I began monitoring the place myself at least twice a day. I've been driving over there, taking traffic counts, identifying the Freedom campers, taking a condition assessment of the general area, and monitoring the number of car parks that are left there, condition of the surf to determine the day. And I've been doing that for 10 days. I'm putting it on an Excel spreadsheet, and I will continue to do that. While I do understand some of the concerns, I think that it's overstated at the moment. I've always been able to get a park. I think a lot of local people are using vans at the moment, and if you see all the vans parked up at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the afternoon because there's good surf, that doesn't mean those are Freedom camping vans. In fact, the number of vans has never exceeded 11. There's 40 car parks along the front there. But there could be 22, 23 vans there quite easy, but they're not all Freedom camping vans. So I think we have to just look at the situation and the reality of what's happening and understand whether it is an issue from Freedom camping or whether it's more general than that. I have spoken to some people about the site, because one thing I have identified is that there's a small bin at the southern end of Makarori and no bin at the northern side of that car park. So there is capacity to improve it. But as far as the issues of not parking, urinating, litter, all the things I'm seeing on Facebook, people's bad behaviour and that, in 10 days of at least 20 monitoring visits, I have seen none of those issues. In fact, I've got to know quite a few Germans and Brazilians and English people and American, and they're a great bunch. And I'd be an absolute hypocrite if I was to start criticising Freedom camping, because I did it for years and years all over the world.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah, on page, where's the page number? It's actually the same page as the issue on the Masonic building, which is the swimming pool fencing safety monitoring system. I think there's a lot of people out there that don't understand fencing. There's a lot of people, and it's come up the last probably 3 summers now, where people are buying reasonably substantial pools and putting them in their backyard, but they're actually of such a size that they do require fencing. But people think because their property is fenced, that they are meeting those fencing requirements. Is it that the fencing has to be separation from the house? Because a lot of the pools that are going on at the moment, you can walk out the back door into the pool. So I just think we need to get some clarity out there about these people that do have these quite substantial sized pools, thinking they're fenced because their property is fenced, but not necessarily the pool.
But they sent the link to us, so we can watch that.
Yeah.
I haven't watched it yet.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, we are monitoring at the moment. If what I'd encourage, if people are unsure about whether their fencing meets the standard or not, that they actually get in contact with council and we can provide that advice. There's also a lot of information out on it, whether your property is likely to comply or not. It is very much an individual basis, depending on there might be lots of different factors in terms of access to those pools from properties or large properties that you refer to, whether a child or so can actually unlock it, because it's very different for individual cases. Property access to the pool area is very much dependent on how it's set up, and the council can provide advice on that.
So
Sorry.
you still haven't got clarity around whether a child could walk out of their house and there'd be no fencing between the back door, which could be open, and they stroll out of their house and into the pool. Is there a requirement for?
There are requirements. It's very much on an individual property basis. It's about having bolts and deadlock systems and whether a child could actually access those. To give a sort of practical example. So, for example, if you have a glazed access door, has it got a bolt up the top, and the property, the building team would be able to give advice on that. So it is very much individual to that property. There are fencing requirements, and those are quite well documented.
Mm.
So
a lot of these circumstances where I do see this are tenanted properties. Is the responsibility on the landlord to sort that out, or the tenant?
Usually it is the property owner, but I can take advice on that and get back to you. I'm not exactly sure in terms of those circumstances, but I can get an answer to you later.
Can we just
Thank you.
give an explanation of, and it relates to the next page, what I'm looking at is Article 103. On 104, and it relates to responsible, the action is 1, and the whole circle is red, and it says 100%. But if I look at the code, that says it's off track. And yet the green circle is 100% as well, and it says it's on track. So could managers explain what I'm reading? It's particularly obvious on 104, and down at the bottom, the target is 100% of the swimming pool monitoring system, and the actual says 45%. Mr. Prophet's really working out the answer, are you, Mr. Prophet?
It's got his.
Could you tell us? Page 104. Thank you. A little 9 at the bottom corner. Number 9 on the bottom right-hand corner.
So the 45% that's referenced there is in regards to the work that's been progressed just this quarter, and 100% is the annual target.
And up the top of the page, where we've got a whole red circle that says actions, 100%, and if I read the graph, that means off track, it's red, and 100% for performance measure, that's on track. So can you tell me the difference between an action and a performance measure?
No.
An action is a specific task that we've committed to undertake. Performance measure is those things that we're measuring ourselves against when it comes to the success or otherwise of achieving.
So how can a councillor monitor the performance with respect to this particular item, which is perhaps we could have an explanation of it.
Just through you, Madam Chair, we'll check, but in terms of performance, sometimes you might have an action which is set out, but the performance measure is slightly different because it's actually set out in regulation.
Indeed.
So there's a difference between that and the actual KPI set by the council.
But if we're going to report like this, if you turn to that
Thank you, Madam Chair. We'll get an explanation to you. Part of it is a system which generates it like this, but we'll get that explanation to you.
when I read the minutes of today's meeting, and there was that public deputation from the Awapuni Moana Trust, and I was seeing some work happening there, and I was wondering, is that at all related or taking into account what those gentlemen brought to our committee last time, or is this a total separate piece of work? Totally separate.
They are related.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just add that there was some work actually ongoing with David and his team in terms of incorporating that work that was presented to committee last time, and we'll be able to get an update on that from David next time.
And the drainage scheme.
Yeah, I'm on page 115. I'm really intrigued to read the paragraph under restoring the Waipu catchment. One property gets most of $7.4 million. But what I really want to talk about is the Wainaki restoration biodiversity. The last sentence there says, it is noted that the funding in the 2015-2025 long-term plan has been cut. Is that saying that the whole project is no longer going ahead? And is that what we're going to be workshopping? Or is it just part of the project has been cut? I'm not quite. So,
can I ask how they can
Through you, Madam Chair, those figures and the details of those figures were actually put to Council in the workshop that I believe occurred at the Waikanae Surf Club. So it wasn't, I know there were quite a lot of other figures put together at that time that we had our workshop, but there wasn't an item that was debated vigorously by Council.
No, you're right, it wasn't, because Councillor Dunn and I would have noticed it. It must have been put in the figures, but it maybe didn't say this is going to be the outcome. Thank you.
Supplementary, is it fair to say that we'll be covering this in the workshop? Because I don't think it is something that the community nor councillors want to see is no longer in the long-term plan. I think the waterworks bush is too significant for our region. It's where we get our drinking water from. So I'll be comfortable knowing that it's going to be in our workshop and the funding towards it may come from that workshop. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, we're happy to cover it in the workshop, and what other funding mechanisms, as I said, might be available to us through either external funding or not. That will not change in terms of what's been put out in terms of the draft LTP. It still has to go through its submission process as well, and Councillor can look at all of that along with all the other submissions in terms of money allocation to potentially revisit that. But yes, we will cover it in the workshop, but it doesn't change what has been put out in that councillors agreed for the consultation of the draft LTP.
Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think that there are a number of issues with illegally parked cars as well, and I think I have commented to Councillor McLean that there are a number that are going for further enforcement decisions before our statutory sort of through our processes. I'll just ask Gary, our team leader, if he could give you an update on the comment on that particular issue.
Yeah, through Madam Chair, this, as you're aware, this is an ongoing issue. It has been ongoing for some time. We have... Little toy. We have tried to work with the occupant several times to remove the vehicles, and when we do ask him to remove them, he does, but as soon as he's removed them, there's more back, and this is what is causing such a problem. Latest we've been out, we've taken samples of the soil, and what we're doing now is we're waiting for the results, and it's going to be referred back to our enforcement decision group to decide what the next course of action is going to be.
As I said, Madam Chair, this is not a complaint about this group. When does it become a matter of law for the police?
Please answer for that, please, from someone.
I think in terms of safety, I've driven out there myself over weekends at times, going to some family houses, and it's quite a kind of dangerous area to go by. And I think from a safety point of view, then that's something that might be worth involving the police in. How much we can get involved in, I wouldn't be sure. But certainly from our point of view, from a compliance point of view, that's something that we're kind of actively working on, trying to get it resolved as soon as possible. If.
On that same page in enforcement, we've got one there. It really looks like that was a substantial amount of earthworks and illegal works, really, that was being done there, and it would have taken probably a considerable amount of time. And a lot of it is probably permanent damage. So I see enforcement infringements as being undertaken. But if we see that sort of stuff happening in the future, are we able to get a immediate cease and desist order on them? So that, you know, because did we wait till this all got done before we saw it, or did we see it early and couldn't do anything about it? Because I see a lot of this stuff has been damaging to the environment, but it's quite permanent damage. You know, he's done. There's so much work's happened there that it's created quite substantial damage. Mm. Yeah, but just in general terms, if we see it in the future, are we able to go there and say, right, immediately cease and desist so that it doesn't go any further? Or are we in a process of we start discussions with them and they continue working and other stuff gets going? So, yeah.
Through you, Madam Chair, in answer to Councillor Cranston's question, yes, we can take enforcement action immediately in terms of an abatement notice, and we do as well. So it's not just a case of that. It is a case-by-case basis when an officer goes out to the site and actually visits the site, and they'll make a call whether action is required straight away. For a lot of these that we have been investigating, these are ones of note where we're taking action and where further enforcement action is possible. So we are starting to report that back to councillors, and yes, we can take immediate action, and we do.
Cool. And just a little one, page 118, City Watch. They do a great job, but I was a bit surprised to see how great their job was. Assisted retailers 952 times, and one of the assistants was standing in their shop while they go to the bank. Now, I go to the bank now and then, and you can stand in those bank queues for a considerable amount of time. So, yeah, but the other aspect of that is there must be an element of risk there if they've suddenly got responsibility for that shop and something goes missing or something. What's to stop the shop owner from accusing them? I'm not sure they would, but you know, I can sort of in the back of my head, I can see quite a few risks with staff from City Watch minding a person's shop. I don't know what, I'm sure it's not 952 times, but they said assisted retailers 952 times. And then one of the assistants was standing in the shop while they go and do the banking. So I just think we do need to assess if there is risk in doing that. They do have to have a good relationship with the shop owners and that, but yeah, there's a balance there.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try and answer Councillor Burdett's question. I might draw on a staff member for some additional information. The actual money funded by NZTA is in terms of that, I think the figure was, you said $103,000? Sorry, $137,000. The majority of that includes the actual vehicle operated by staff. 2 officers who actually undertake 20 hours of monitoring a month, but I understand that's in conjunction with other staff. So I'm just going to hand over to Ross to give you a little bit more information on how that process actually works with those stock control officers.
Thank you. Is that a cumulative 20 hours now?
Yeah, through Madam Chair. That's 20 each. And Jim and I haven't had a discussion about it yet, but we are meaning to, that we can maybe increase that hours. And I do acknowledge that up the coast stock is a problem on the roads. And I am encouraging my staff to be a little bit more proactive about that rather than just being the ambulance at the bottom of the hill. And in saying that, there is some stations Poya there that have gone through a substantial amount of fencing, road fencing, and the numbers have come down quite substantially in the last couple of months, where it was a daily occurrence really, especially with all the logging trucks, but that has come down. But yes, there is some scope there for some more hours where necessary. That 20 hours is just their base. So sometimes they are doing more than that.
Surely we were providing a vehicle for our own staff and they're not working at night. So how come we need to take the cost of the vehicle out of the increased NCFTA subsidy when one might have thought we would have used it for more hours?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As far as I understand it, there are two vehicles. There's a GDC vehicle. Up the coast, there are two GDC vehicles.
Two.
And the one that's supplied by the NZTA. So that overall cost covers vehicle maintenance, all the operational costs in terms of carting animal or livestock or disposal, as well as those staff hours. So that's the totality of the package.
Thank you.
Yeah, the report indicates dissatisfaction with the contractor for noise complaints. Have you resolved that?
Through you, Madam Chair, sorry, can you repeat, Councillor Cranston?
It's page 111. The report indicates dissatisfaction with the noise control contractors. And I just wondered if you'd resolve those issues. Yeah, poor response by the contractor has been highlighted, indicating that if it continues in next month, the risk component will be. Yeah.
Thank you. Through Madam Chair, I understand those contractor issues have been. There has been meeting between the manager responsible and those contractors about clear understandings about what is actually required. What it actually refers to is that there are a lot of more health and safety requirements put in terms of those contractors, in terms of attending. So they actually have to do quite a bit of assessment work up front before they actually attend an incident. So the lower in terms of performance is due to additional health and safety requirements being put on those contractors. So response times might not be as great.
In our papers notes that they might not have been accurately reported, or it infers that maybe people who are making the report, page 103, after our incidents are not being correctly reported in the system and are affecting targets. So surely that we can get that sorted, because the people who are working after hours, I'm sure they want us to know how much time they are working. So has that been resolved?
Through Madam Chair, hasn't been resolved at this stage. What it is with the system is the fact that I could actually close off an RFS, and if someone else opened that to do something on it, it automatically goes out of schedule. So it's a technical thing that we are working with and we're trying to solve. It could be just something that is very little, and someone just, customer service can open it and just to change something in it, and it comes, I'll get an email straight away saying it's escalated, where it hasn't. Yeah, it's been resolved.
Thank you. I'm sure we will want to get council officers will want to see that resolved.
I certainly do.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. As I pointed out, this was the actual report is generated up to November for financials and December. So yes, changes have been made in terms of those hearing dates. And in terms of the modelling, I'm wondering if our consents manager could actually answer what those might relate to. Thank you.
So page 125. Two bylaws have lapsed and no longer enforceable. One was stock control, which was spoken about a bit, but the other one's fire prevention involving vegetation. So I just wondered, with that lapse and no longer enforceable, what our risks are around that bylaw not being enforceable, and you know, what we need to look at there.
That's not quite the words that were in the agenda this morning, but it said the NZTA had issued with the stock control bylaw. Is anyone able to cast a bit of light on that? Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair, it's something I'll have to bring back to the committee in terms of what aspects of the bylaws are unenforceable, if indeed they are, and those lapses. So I'll have to check and come back to you with that, I'm afraid.
I'm sorry I didn't flag it to you, but I mean, I did ask about it this morning at community development because it was in their agenda as well. Thank you.